Hi, welcome to the start of the journey, Sustaining Creation, a faith journey for small groups. And right from the start, at the start of the journey, we're going to encounter a scripture that none of us wants to hear. None of us in the modern world, anyway, wants to hear. We close our ears, we turn off our eyes, and we say, no, we don't want to hear that. But yet we must. It comes to us from the Gospel of Luke, the 12th chapter, beginning with the 15th verse. You're going to recognize it real fast. And Jesus said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. That right there should warn us. Whenever Jesus is going to tell us a very difficult truth, he puts them in a parable. Because he knows if he just says the difficult truth, we'll close our ears, we'll shut our eyes. But by burying them in a story, maybe we'll wrestle with them. Maybe we'll spend time with it until we're willing to accept there's a very difficult truth there that should change our lives. So let's get into it. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns, build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God.'" We don't like that parable. It rings way too close to home. Because the truth is, our greed, our desire for a life that always has more, has brought us to this place in time where the earth is teetering on the edge of destruction. Where if we continue on the way we are, our kids will not have a life. So we're going to wrestle with this concept of greed, based on the way we live, on our demand that our modern life always gives us more and for less. So what follows is slides, pictures from across the globe, which show what's happening right here, right now, and also on the other side of the globe, what the climate crisis, the Earth's sustainability crisis is doing to human beings, how human beings are suffering right now. We'll spend some time with that uncomfortable truth. Then we'll visit a couple of our wisdom leaders and get their understanding of it. And then I'll come back and I'll wrap up with one more look at our greed. So watch the video. Hold on to your seats. It's an uncomfortable start to this journey, but a very necessary one. When the astronauts sent back this image of the Earth, it should have changed how we looked at the Earth. It should have told us that the Earth was actually small, not huge, but small and fragile, and that we could hurt it, and that God had put it in our care to take care of, not to consume, not to destroy, but to take care of. It's fragile. You see that small blue line? That's our atmosphere. That's what makes life on this planet possible. It gives us oxygen to breathe, but it also keeps the temperature just right. But we're messing with it. We're throwing up all this pollution from burning oil and coal and gas, and it's changing that atmosphere. It's trapping more heat. Where does it come from? Well, we burn fossil fuels for about every aspect of our modern life, from farming to agriculture to manufacturing to electricity generation. But we dramatically have increased the amount of pollution that we're doing. In my lifetime, from 1950 to now, we've increased sixfold the amount of pollution that we're throwing up in the atmosphere. In fact, the amount of pollution being released in the atmosphere is greater than over 66 million years. If you were to measure the energy, it equates to 400,000 atomic bombs going off every day. So that yields hottest year records, 2016, and before that 2015, and before that 2014, which means that the number of really hot days are growing. And as we look out, future 95 is going to look like it's the new normal. And already cities where people live are hitting 129 degrees Fahrenheit. How do you live and 129 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, in some places you don't. 2,300 people died in India in their heat wave. So much so that the government had to start passing out water to counteract all of the deaths that were coming. But it wasn't just India. Pakistan had 1,200 people that died in their heat wave. We're seeing this across the globe, and it really strikes the poorest. That extra heat, most of it is being trapped by the oceans, which is fortunate, otherwise we'd be really hot. But it's unfortunate in that extra heat drives huge storms. When the wind passes over and picks up the heat from that ocean and the moisture from that ocean, we get the super typhoons, the super hurricanes, and the immense damage that they can cause. We see that in the Philippines. But we've also seen it here in the U.S. too, when we look at our major storms. Katrina, and here's Hurricane Sandy. We remember all this trouble and problems and people that were hurt and the cities that were destroyed from Hurricane Sandy. There's Atlantic City. There's New York City, the floods, the waters coming up. And that's saltwater intrusion too, besides just a deluge. Scientists tell us that global warming is contributing to extreme weather across the globe because we've changed how the climate works. So the storms and the downpours get bigger. They get immense. They get incredibly huge. There are places that have storms that have delivered what used to be their annual rainfall in a matter of a day or two. How do you survive such a storm? Imagine being caught when such a storm would hit. There's Arizona. But we've also seen this on the East Coast and across the globe. When the storms hit with that kind of force, they make cars seem like matchsticks just being flown apart by the floods. The floods that destroy people's homes and people's lives and people's economies. The first companies that recognized this were actually the insurance companies when they realized how much more money they were paying out because of claims. And they realized it's from the storms and that we've changed the weather. Here's the odd thing, the heat that drives the storms also drives the droughts. So it makes the wet places wetter, but the dry places drier. And when you have droughts, it kills off the livestock, it kills off the farms, and kills off the farmers. $2 billion in damage in China from their drought. The droughts in Thailand and across Southeast Asia, making it almost impossible to live as a farmer. In fact, in one area in India, 400 farmers committed suicide because they were so desperate over the loss of their crops. It's making sections of the sub-Saharan Africa to be inhospitable to life. Look at all of the countries that have declared emergencies or disasters. You want to know why we have a global migration crisis? Look at the weather. These droughts also drive super storms of fire. Forest fires that pollute. There are also forest fires that take away the trees that we need to reverse the pollution. Forest fires that are of stunning size and duration, and the fire season now almost has without end. And all of that together, the drought and the fires, results in shortages of food. And when there's food shortages, then the food prices spike, and the poor can't afford to eat. And when the poor can't afford to eat, then they get desperate. So desperate people first protest in Pakistan, in Mozambique. The desperate people eventually protest is not enough. Frustrations and despair build into violence. So in Tunisia, you had the Arab Spring riots. We're seeing this across the globe. We're going to see much more, but Syria's drought, that excessive drought that killed off 80% of their farm stock and 50% of the farms, drove everybody into the cities, that wound up causing a major factor in the civil war in Syria, which has now claimed 300,000 lives, making people desperate to find a place to live. Water It's so essential to life. And where do we use it? Most of it goes into agriculture. So when you have shortage, when you have scarcity of water, you can't feed the people. People are starving and desperate, not just in India, Pakistan, but it's also affecting our high plains, the breadbasket of America that we feed the rest of the world. The air pollution we throw up also directly kills people. You can map that across the globe. You can see it in areas that are just so desperately that it affects the lifespan. This is a clear picture of China and Beijing, but on a different day you wouldn't be able to see these buildings. Kids have to be treated with oxygen, and everybody has to go around wearing face masks. You can tell the rich from the poor because they have designer air masks for the rich, and the poor have to stick with cotton cloths. Kids shouldn't have to grow up this way. Pollution not only affects lifespan, it affects the mental capacity of kids. Worldwide air pollution, the World Health Organization tells us now kills 6.5 million people every year. As if pollution isn't enough, the heat we're putting in the earth is melting the Arctic and the Antarctic. That's causing sea levels to rise, and we expect that to escalate. And so that's putting cities across the globe in danger. Cities that sit right on the edge of the ocean level, where a little bit of increase can flood them. In fact, right now, high tides in Miami Beach regularly flood the streets. They're trying to challenge this with putting in new sewer pipes. That's just a short-term fix. Eventually, all this real estate is in jeopardy. And what are people to do? Galveston, Texas, right on the bay. By the year 2100, they're talking about the sea level being 5 foot higher. The cost of carbon, the cost of the pollution of burning oil, coal, and gas affects every aspect of our life. It has a tremendous cost that we're just starting to awaken to realize that we can't keep doing this. The Bank of England says that the vast majority of the oil, coal, and gas that's in the ground is unburnable. If our kids are to have a future, we cannot burn that. And what does that mean? That means that on the physical balance sheets of the oil companies, coal companies, and gas companies, there's $22 trillion of assets they cannot burn. That's why they're fueling climate denial. That's why they're fighting to keep us from responding. That's the carbon bubble. We're going to talk a little bit more about the carbon bubble on scene down in Florida, where we're looking at the risk of this to come. But it's a very real problem. It affects our future, and we have to face it now.
My concern is, as I look at the way that, in my mind's eye, corporate greed is driving a lot in our nation, the exploitation of the earth, the way that we are, I read the children's story by Dr. Seuss to my daughters, the Lorax. And in the Lorax they talk about making these Sneeds, these new products, and at first the owner of the Sneed, the entrepreneur, has a great idea, and he's going to develop this idea, and it's a wonderful thing. And then the more he finds out how much people like them, the more he decides he's going to expand and make them. And then he begins expanding at a rate that he's not considering the costs to the animals and the trees that he's exploiting to make these items. And as I was reading this to my daughters, I've been thinking about the tar sands being exploited in British Columbia and Alberta. I look at the drill baby drill, and I look at the mountains in West Virginia, Virginia, and Tennessee that I've driven through many times, and the mountain topping and the poor people that are affected there by the runoff and the sludge that goes into their waters and causes landslides and destroys their family hunting grounds that they've had for generation after generation. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. What kind of world am I leaving for my children? Will they grow up in a time and place when they can do things that I've done, going to Glacier National Park and hiking those trails and seeing the beautiful glaciers and experiencing the beauty of creation by being in it? Or will so many species and so much land be gone, be used and thrown away, disposed of, that the future that they experience will be one that the creation has been forever altered by human beings in a way that many of the species and plants and animals that I know and love will be gone. Every year I go to South Africa, not every year, but every other year or so, I try to go do mission work in South Africa. And on my off day, I usually go and take a safari to see the great beasts of Africa. And I always love seeing the rhinos. And I think about all the poaching and infringement of their land, which is really the primary challenge, is not only the poaching for their horns, but the threat to their land and just lack of habitat that's pushing rhinos and cheetahs and elephants to the brinks of extinction. And I've been wondering, as I talk to my wife, if I take them, when they're 16 or 18, will there be any rhino left?
So let me begin by grounding us in the current reality. I'll be very selective because, frankly, most people don't want to hear what our current reality is, and that's something that I'll discuss a little later. First, the North Pole was above freezing at Christmas. That's 50 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. In November 2016, global sea ice was 25% below the median of the last 35 years. Fire season is now 19% longer than it used to be, and drought-related fires are breaking out in unexpected places like North Georgia, North Carolina, and Israel. U.S. record high temperatures outran record lows by a ratio of 20 to 1. This past year, the United States experienced 6 once every 1,000-year rain events. Many economists are now warning about a collapse of waterfront property market due to the rising seas caused by climate change. When this economic crisis begins, it will surpass the mortgage crisis of 2008. By 2040, 30% of Tampa will be underwater. Unless you think that time is decades off, the Earth's temperature is already well into the range that existed during the Eemian period 120,000 years ago, when sea level was 20 to 30 feet higher than it is today. So these changes, and dozens more that I could mention, are of a scale that we can hardly comprehend. 200 years of human activity, known as the industrial era, has upended millions of years of nature's balance. The changes we have wrought have increased the rate of species extinction 1,000-fold. The industrial era, fueled by the unconstrained use of fossil fuel, qualifies as a planetary event on the same scale as the meteorite that hit the Earth 66 million years ago, wiping out the dinosaurs, ending the Cretaceous period, and with it, the entire Mesozoic era. Civilization has developed thanks to continuity, diversity, and abundance of creation throughout the past 12,000 years. For most of the past 100,000 years, creation has been hospitable to human life. That's about how long our brains have had the capacity to actually imagine something transcendent, something that we and other people of faith would refer to as God. Thanks to the gift of a life-sustaining creation, it's no wonder that all the world's religions imagine a loving God. The World Council of Churches reminds us God's mission begins with the act of creation. Creation's life and God's life are intertwined. Indeed, creation, as we have known it for the past 12,000 years, is the context in which we live into our covenant with God. But here's the problem. The continuity of creation is coming undone. We are the first generations of humans to face the discontinuity of creation. This has huge implications for the church, but communicating this reality is difficult.
So we've taken some time to look at scenes from across the globe of floods and of droughts and of incredible weather and of health effects and of the very threat for war. We've seen that humans are dying right now, they're suffering right now, they're struggling to find a place where it's safe to raise their kids and their grandkids. And the root cause of all of this is our addiction to burning fossil fuels, which arises out of our greed, our insistence that life not change, our insistence that there always be more. And we see that we're starting to destroy the earth, and we're making life in jeopardy for our kids, my kids and your kids, my grandkids and your grandkids. So the question as we go forward is, are we willing to accept that yet? Or like the rich man, are we still thinking, I'll tear down these silos and build bigger ones, and then I can rest, relax, drink, and be merry? And God says, you fool. Stay along for the journey. There's a lot more land to be covered, a lot more difficult truths to uncover, a lot more wisdom to be gained along the way. Next up is a Telling It Forward segment on a specific action item that we would like you to include in your discussion today. It's one of 6 that you should be discussing, but it's going to go deeper into this one to give you an idea on how the other 5 might also be looked at. Don't neglect the other 5, but for right now, sit back and take in the truth of this one. So today we want to focus on action item 14. And what is it? It's to call your congressional representatives, to call your representative, call your senators, and tell them that global warming, that climate change is such a critical issue for you that it will affect how you vote. And if they want to keep your vote, they need to respond to that concern of yours. Now, I've had people tell me that they don't think it will do any good because Congress only listens to those big moneyed lobbyists that bring in all of that money that the politicians use for their campaign. So what does it matter? Jesus told a story in the Gospel of Luke that really touches on this. He talks about a widow and an unjust judge. Now we have to realize that a widow 2,000 years ago had no rights. They couldn't own property. They had to depend on income on a male relative. They had no legal standing to go before a judge. And so it's incredible that Jesus used a widow for this story. Let's talk about it. Jesus said, in a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city, there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, grant me justice against my opponent. For a while, the judge refused, but later he said to himself, though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. She had no legal standing. She had no right to expect that the judge would change, and yet she did not give up. She showed a tenacity, a persistence for the pursuit of justice, that the judge, even though he didn't fear God, came to fear that woman. or at least regard her that it's better to grant her request so that she does not wear me out. That's what it takes to influence Congress. Even though we don't have the money of the big money lobbyists, we can wear them out. We elected them, we can vote for somebody else. And we need to be persistent in that call. So this isn't a one-off. This isn't a one-time thing. I did my thing, I called my congressional representatives. This is the persistence of that widow. Get into a habit. Make it a habit, a weekly habit at best. Call your congressional representatives. Tell them that climate change, that the climate crisis is such a concern for you, is such a concern for your grandkids' future, that they must act now. And eventually, that representative, that senator, will be like that judge, and he will say, even though I don't fear, I'm going to grant their request so that they leave me alone. Can you do this? Sure you can. Try it. So that wraps up our video session for today. What's up next is for your discussion. That's every bit as important, if not more important, than all that we laid out before you. So gather together as a group. Spend some time with the scripture, but give yourself lots of time to dialogue about what you've seen and what you've heard, what has touched you, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Take the time to listen very deeply to the wisdom each other shares. You never know when God is going to speak using another person's voice to give you a truth that you do not yet have. And then last but not least, in your discussion group, spend time with the 6 action items that we have in today's handout sheet. Until next time, enjoy the journey. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Terry Gallagher. See you further along the way.